Welcome to Biztech's Jobs and Careers Show, where we discuss key issues and topics related to jobs and careers across the Asia-Pacific region. Today, we speak to Elisa Mallis, Managing Director and Vice President, Asia-Pacific, as well as Sunil Puri, Asia Head of Research and Product Development at the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL. The Center for Creative Leadership is a top-ranked global non-profit provider of leadership development. Elisa, Sunil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Glad to be here.
Now, Elisa, can we start by you setting the stage by giving us an overview of CCL and its history?
Sure, Brian, and thank you for inviting us to join Biztech Asia. So we are actually just at our 50th anniversary. CCL has been 5 decades focusing around leadership development, and leadership development is all we do. That really differentiates us from many other organizations, including academic institutions and consultancies in this field. In the time that we've been focusing on leadership development, we're coming up to almost 20 years also doing that here in Asia. We are a global organization, as you mentioned. And historically, CCL has been really, I think, even going further back beyond the 50 years from our founders, which were the Vix Richardson Foundation and family, been really trying to answer this question of what is it that helps organizations endure some of the biggest challenges like pandemics and certainly other type of major challenges that were faced, depression and all of the challenges that businesses faced and endured. And as our founders were asking these questions, a couple of words came to mind for them that really would make the difference in helping organizations to get through these type of huge challenges. And those 2 words were leadership and creativity. And certainly going back 80 years when they identified these as important factors, these were words that they weren't talking about yet. People weren't studying yet. And so we have a very rich heritage going back even beyond our 50 years as the center, where we have been studying and trying to understand what is it that makes great leaders, what is it that makes organizations endure through leadership, and how can we also use innovation and creative approaches to do that. In our time here in Asia, so coming up to 17 years, we have been continuing to use that evidence-based approach to leadership. That's one of the things that really differentiates CCL. So everything we do is focused around understanding the research and science of leadership. And also we have continued to focus on a very human-centric approach through experiences in many of our leadership development programs. So Sunil will talk more about some of the research which we have taken a east to west focus, especially in the last few years. We've invested on that, understanding leadership through an Asian lens. And I think we bring some really unique and great insights there. And also in terms of our experiential learning, we offer a number of different type of programs to the various multinational government organizations and some nonprofit organizations we work with here across the Asia-Pacific region. So we'll be delighted to share more around some of our latest research, as well as some of the examples that we're seeing from our clients in the interview with you today, Brian.
Now, Elisa, I think one of the two words struck me completely in terms of this, because it's so relevant to what's happened in the last 18 months, leadership and innovation. And we're going to come back and zoom in on some of that a little bit later. But Sunil, could you tell us a little bit about your product and service offerings in the Asia Pacific region?
So Brian, first of all, thanks for inviting us to talk about CCL here. So at a very high level, Brian, the agenda of the organization is to make a difference in leadership, to make a difference in leadership, get leaders better, to have organizations, more leaders, better leaders, more aware leaders, more innovative leaders. And we do it in a couple of ways. From a product standpoint, there are multiple ways that we help organizations in. We run open enrollment programs wherein we invite leaders to spend a couple of days with us at our various beautiful campuses across the globe and get better at a particular skill or broadly in a particular area. We also have coaching interventions, for instance, for very senior and mid-level executives to help them overcome some of the challenges that they are facing in their careers. Then we have custom engagements wherein, if an organization has a particular challenge or needs their leaders to get developed in a particular set of skills, we will craft, custom programs for them, mid to long-term programs for them, and we'll put their leaders through those programs. We also have licensing products. So, if an organization is looking at developing, let's say, thousands of leaders, we can train their people to develop their leaders internally. We can equip them with everything literally in a box so that they can run those interventions and programs. And that's the way we can scale leadership up. From a mode standpoint, we obviously do face-to-face engagements or in-class engagements. We do online interventions. And now for the past 2 years, and I'm guessing into the future, we are doing and we will be doing a lot of blended learning and development, wherein you spend some part of the program in person, and then you go back and continue the learning online. So that's Sunil, what we do as an organization.
So Sunil, you've probably then, in your time in the organization, seen this quite rapid shift away from face-to-face learning into blended learning. How have the outcomes improved using this approach?
So, Brian, a couple of things have happened. And, case in point, the last 2 years, organizations have gone through a metamorphosis of sorts. They are trying to reinvent themselves. They are trying to pivot and so on. And obviously, because of lockdowns and restrictions, a lot of people are not able to leave the organization premises or not able to leave their homes or their countries and so on. So we've moved to a kind of a blended model of leadership development. Now, there are a couple of trends if you look at the last 2 years. One is that online learning is more acceptable. So, employees don't feel cheated if they are nominated for an online program as compared to, let's say, a custom in-person engagement with CCL in our beautiful campus. So there's more openness for online learning. Also, there is much more learning and development activity happening. So which is good news. In the earlier part of the lockdowns, it was because you wanted to keep your employees engaged, because you wanted to keep your employees busy. But now organizations have realized the power of blended or purely online learning. We started off kind of most organizations started off on a very tentative note vis-a-vis blended and online learning. They did not have the right set of modules. There were very few players like CCL who were offering online and blended learning. So the organizations went through that education path, if you will, in terms of getting mature to absorb and embrace online learning. And that has worked out very well. Especially for us at CCL, we deploy experiential learning. And that's the core of what we do in terms of development. We've been able to transform that experiential learning from class to online interventions. And that has worked beautifully with organizations. Now imagine if you were an L&D person in an enterprise and you are not spending a lot of money on logistics, you can put a lot more leaders through these blended and online learning interventions. So in terms of scaling up, it is good news for the organizations. It is good news for us at CCL.
Now, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later, Sunil, when we drill down in terms of learning and development. But Elisa, can you shed some light into the recent survey that you collaborated with AmCham Singapore, and tell us about the objectives of the survey and its scope?
Sure, yeah. So every year, the American Chamber of Commerce in Singapore conducts a Manpower Survey. And this year, Center for Creative Leadership supported that. The survey itself is broad in scope, really looking to understand how the AmCham member businesses, so that would be some subset of the 550 member organizations, that are, private sector, some maybe nonprofits as well. Those AmCham member companies, mainly private sector companies here in Singapore, feel about manpower challenges, what they see. And there are a number of areas that are covered, Brian, in the Manpower Survey, including how inclusive workplaces are, including how the member companies are feeling about some of the government policies, manpower policies that are in place, and so on. So I definitely recommend taking a look at the study. Now, we, CCL, supported the study, and we dove into a couple of areas with the chamber. One was around trying to understand more what would help Singaporean leaders gain access to regional and global roles and be able to step into those roles more successfully. That has been an area where the government and private sector wants to see more progress. We also helped to bring in some additional examples from a variety of client companies. We looked into inclusiveness, into well-being a little bit more in the survey this year, and had more examples and stories to share.
Now, I read your survey, and you highlighted quite a number of Singaporean leaders who have great careers in multinational companies. And one of the issues that came out a lot was the fact that mobility was a key factor in terms of their career growth. Could you share some of the key findings that you found in terms of what was necessary for Singaporean leaders to really grow their careers within a multinational framework?
Well, I think very similar to what you would find with leaders in other countries as well. They really need to feel that there is a career path ahead of them when they take these roles in other countries. Leaders need to feel that there is a path to return to their home country. And so we heard very similar things from the Singaporean leaders who have done this successfully, were able to navigate some of the challenges to ensure that there was a career path for them coming back, that some of the barriers we see for Singaporean leaders taking those roles overseas, like whether their spouse will be able to have a role, how it will impact the spouse's career. Also, education is a big factor for the leaders. If they will be overseas, what school system, and then coming back to Singapore, what the options will be in terms of schooling. So all of these things play a role. What we saw, Brian, for leaders who were able to navigate this successfully, they were able to leverage some of the latest programs that government or the private sector have put in place to enable and make it easier for Singaporean leaders. They also tended to be risk takers. So in some cases, there wasn't necessarily a guarantee that there would be that very secure career path back home, but they did sort of increase their exposure and take a risk to try a role in another market. Generally, what we see is a very important factor for these leaders to be successful in regional and global roles is exposure, so that they are having an opportunity, whether it's through physically going to other countries to take on roles. And today we see virtual opportunities more and more so, where they can move across functions, across bigger roles and scope. And the leaders who put themselves out there and took the opportunity for exposure, again, whether it's living in other countries or trying out new roles, are the ones who are better equipped and the ones who we have seen be successful. They really sort of put themselves, let's say, out of their comfort zone in different ways.
Now, is that something that also is going to be amplified as a result of this pandemic? Because flexible work relationships, work arrangements are really going to be the way forward, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Actually, one of the findings in the AmCham survey was that 70% of the member companies surveyed here in Singapore put official measures to foster an inclusive and progressive workplace, like health programs and part-time reemployment opportunities. So we do see, and the vast majority of companies, 94%, are supporting remote work, and 69% are providing mental health and wellness support to employees. So of this subset of companies, we do see here in Singapore, this is all data from here in Singapore, that there is much more flexibility being offered as a result of the pandemic. And it really has, the pandemic, I would say, has created an opportunity for organizations to get out there and try some of these new flexible approaches, try out a number of these well-being practices and see what the results are. And for many, I think the results are positive so far, and they will continue to, this trend of increased flexibility in work policy, I think will continue globally, and particularly here in Singapore, where there has been a lot of positive development and a lot of progress and a lot of great examples.
Sunil, I want to zoom in on you and really get your insights in terms of how the pandemic has changed organizational culture. Obviously, as Elisa has mentioned, flexible work arrangements are something that employers have now got their heads around, but also there's increased focus on people, a people-first culture, as well as a greater scrutiny on employees' mental well-being. Talk us through some of those issues and what your findings have been.
So Brian, the last 2 years have shaken the organizations up. It's kind of an understatement that organizations have gone through a lot of pain. Most organizations, some organizations have benefited also in the last 2 years, especially in the retail and food space. But a lot of organizations have gotten shaken up. And, the results, the impact of the pandemic is being seen as long drawn. You see retention issues that organizations are facing at this point, for no apparent reasons, people are leaving. Good people are leaving. They don't have a job, but they are leaving the organizations, and we see it playing out globally. So organizations that are ahead of the curve, more progressive organizations, more aware organizations have embraced what you just mentioned, the people first kind of a culture, if you will. Now, putting people at the center. So the shift has been from profit maximization to living the purpose of the organization. In a lot of cases, this purpose centers around the people that you are able to retain, the people that make the core of the enterprise. So in terms of culture shifts, we've seen a couple. One is obvious, there's more flexibility, more hybrid working, more what we call virtual PATs that Elisa was referring to, people operating maybe out of Singapore or out of KL, but managing another geography, people working different times, basis what works for them in their personal life, and so on. So a lot of flexibility around that, which is being embraced, which is being appreciated by employees. Then there's a lot of empathy. The second shift in the culture is more empathetic. As I said, the shift from profit maximization to wellness, shift from profit maximization to well-being of employees. So the organizations have become much more empathetic. The culture and the leaning is more towards that. This third shift that we see, Brian, is around agility, from from productivity to resilience. Less focus on productivity, more focus on being ready for whatever the world or the business world or otherwise may throw at you. From efficiency to impact, worrying less about efficiency at this point, more about having an impactful or having an impact on top line or bottom line of the enterprise or people issues in the enterprise. That's the third shift we've seen around agility. The fourth shift is around being more collaborative. The entire organization, irrespective of where the offices were, have gone through a lot of pain. The enterprises have realized that the only way to emerge out of this mess and go back to the growth rates they were seeing earlier is by holding each other's hand, by people collaborating across geographies, across functions, across businesses, and so on. And the final shift that we've seen is around more inclusiveness, more inclusivity in the organization, not only because of the COVID, but a lot of other developments that have happened around diversity and inclusiveness issues across the globe. So those are the 5 shifts, flexibility, organizations being more empathetic, more agile, more collaborative, and more inclusive.
Now, the other thing I want to add to that is also then around retention, because as you correctly pointed out, it's a global phenomenon where people are in fact resigning from their jobs. I think there's lots of articles and shows around that. But back to what you said earlier, that increased emphasis on, if you're being people first, you're also investing in your people, isn't it, in terms of learning and development, and that's where obviously organizations like you come in.
Absolutely, that's true. And you know, the difference and why we see this retention issue, Brian, and my point of view is that employees have traditionally seen this the relationship with the organization as transactional. Hey, I work for you, I do my best, I work for you, I hit the ball out of the park on whatever you throw at me. In return, you give me money to pay my bills, to take care of my family, to give me financial and economic stability, if you will. Now, in the last 2 years, people have realized, hey, this is not all I want. I want something else. I want a more humane approach. I want a more empathetic approach, a more relationship-oriented approach with the organization. And therefore, you see people seeking that. And a lot of organizations were not prepared for this. A lot of organizations thought that they are paying good money, giving good bonuses, good incentives, and people will stay. That's not the case. So people are looking for more relationship-based approach with organizations. And if organizations, on those organizations that are able to provide that, are seeing a lot of lift in terms of engagement, a lot of lift in terms of people stretching for the enterprise, because organizations, remember, are also going through pain. So organizations that have been able to make that culture shift are seeing lift in productivity because people are working longer, they are developing new skills, they are embracing learning and development. They realize that organizations need them to pivot, and they are doing that by L&D. The second shift is around more discretionary effort. Hey, I lean forward when there is a problem rather than saying, this is not my responsibility, this is somebody else's job. I lean forward and say, I'm ready to take this call. And sometimes it is about developing new skills. Sometimes it is also about just taking up projects that are kind of widow projects, if you will. Nobody wants them. And then, also we'll see a lift in retention. So, from a leadership development standpoint, there's a lot more openness towards developing skills, a lot more openness to go out of your way and develop skills that traditionally you may have thought are not a part of your traditional, development career or development strategy, if you will, as an individual.
Now, Elisa, what are CCL's plans for 2022, given these organizational shifts and cultural shifts that are taking place globally?
Yeah, so thanks, Brian. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing ourselves, in fact, because we face the same challenges that all of our clients, that we're trying to help our clients and all these other organizations with. And as Sunil pointed out, this people first agenda, which is really about putting relationships and our common humanity first, is something that CCL is also doing. So we have a people first agenda ourselves for our employees. And I think that one aspect right now, as we move into this hybrid work of this, is how we need to help people balance the virtual world and the face-to-face world. So early on in the pandemic, Sunil and I wrote a piece, and one of the areas we talked about was high tech and human touch, and how we balance those things in this high tech environment, this virtual environment. How do we maintain the human touch? I think that is something that still very much holds true. And just this morning, I had a face-to-face meeting with one of our senior team members that just wouldn't be the same virtually. So as we start to get into the opportunity to bring in a bit more face-to-face when it's safe and when it's appropriate, I think that it's worth the investment. And certainly it is about the hybrid now, so we need to be able to do both. So in CCL, we are trying to also help our clients find the right balance, and how do you really cultivate that people first agenda in a way that will help your employees balance the virtual world and the face-to-face world. And so in terms of our plans for 2022, these areas around hybrid working, around employee well-being, around equity, diversity, and inclusion are some of the top agenda items for CCL in terms of offerings, in terms of what we're doing. Here in Asia, we will continue to also focus on looking at leadership through an Asian lens, global Asian leader. And also one of the big areas that we have helped globally and here in Asia our clients with is around this area of resilience and burning bright. And we have seen so many amazing practices across the globe in this area over the last year. We have implemented a number of them ourselves. I personally have tried out different things this year when it comes to burning bright rather than burning out, because I think, Brian, this is probably one of the biggest threats that faces the organization beyond the resignation that you talked about is the area of burnout for employees. And so again, the practices, recovery practices that organizations can be putting in place to help their employees. We're using a number of different approaches in CCL for our team members as well. I think is going to be one of the most important things to sustain employee well-being and therefore organizational well-being. Organizations will not be successful if their people, if their employees are not in a state of well-being. And I think that's something we really have to realize. We can have all the technology, but if our people are not doing well, we won't be successful.
Elisa, Sunil, it's been a very informative conversation. But before we leave, could each of you leave us with some final insights before we end the conversation? We'll start with you, Sunil.
Okay, the one message I would love to leave this conversation with is for leaders. That leaders across the globe must be honest and authentic in times like these. When going gets tough for the organizations, leaders must bring their true self out. They don't have a choice because they are being watched. They are being watched by the stakeholders. They are being watched by the boards if you are a CEO or a C-suite leaders. They're also being watched by the society and employees. So be authentic, be honest, and that's the only way to build trust with the key stakeholders.
Elisa?
I think we have entered an era where unexpected challenges and crisis will be the norm. And so resilience at the individual level, at the team level, at the organizational level, how do we foster higher levels of resilience? What are the practices that we need to be putting in place as an organization and also as individual leaders is very important for success, not just in the coming year, but I think in the coming decade.
Elisa and Sunil, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thanks, Brian, for inviting us.
Thank you, Brian. A pleasure.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Elisa Mallis, Managing Director and Vice President, Asia Pacific, as well as Sunil Puri, Asia Head of Research and Product Development at CCL, on Biztech's Jobs and Careers show. This video and podcast will be on our various platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please subscribe, like, and click the notification buttons of our various platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.